Any questions for me before people are already rolling in?
Cool.
Note takers. Interesting. What's up, everyone? We're going to let everyone roll on in. We're going to give it a minute or two. Shout out where you're joining us from. I'm in Chicago. Sounds like Nik's in New York City right now for business. Let us know where you're at. NYC, Mexico City. Place is happening right now. A lot of people in Mexico City. Give it a couple more minutes. City. It sounds great, doesn't it? It's the rainy season there right now. I think. One of our team members, she lives in Mexico City. Casablanca, Morocco, London. Awesome. Got a lot of people.
We are global.
We are going to be global today. We'll give it one more minute and we'll get started here. We will be recording this, so if anyone wants the recording after, we'll send it out with the recap. We'll link to any resources we talked about, and Accra, Ghana. Look at that, very cool. Awesome. All right, I'm going to share my screen. We're going to get started here. Let me see. Wait, we're good, Nik? Can you see it?
Yes, sir. Looking good.
Awesome. Very cool. Another New Yorker. Awesome. Welcome, Michelle. So, hey, everyone. My name is Mike Cruz. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the founder and CEO of Visible. Today, super excited to talk to Nik Talreja. He is the CEO and co-founder of Sydecar. We're going to be talking a lot about SPVs and founder-led SPV, something Nik and the Sydecar team are absolutely experts at. Before Sydecar, Nik has been a lawyer practicing security and transactional law, working with startups. He's also an investor with his fund, 18 Ventures. And we'll get into Sydecar, but kind of in short, Sydecar is laying bricks for the next kind of generation of alternative asset investing. So their goal is to bring really frictionless deal execution to founders and to venture investors. Nik, thanks for joining and welcome.
Thanks for having me, Mike. This is awesome.
Did I miss anything?
No, background? I couldn't have said it better myself.
What's better, being a lawyer or being a startup founder?
I just go with recovering attorney. That's usually my short description because I don't think you ever fully recover.
A lot of people say recovering. I hear that a lot from previous attorneys. Cool. Well, like I mentioned, we are recording this. So we'll send that out with the recap, usually within 24 to 48 hours after. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to use Zoom chat. Matt on our team is standing by, so we'll help either answer those real time or we'll get to them at the end. And in terms of our agenda, one is like, what is Sydecar? And we'll kind of hear Nik the founding story and what Sydecar has been up to. We'll talk about SPVs. What are they? How can founders utilize SPVs? Some considerations, best practices for that. We'll wrap with Q&A. We want this to be as interactive as possible. And then, yeah, we'll send out the recording. But Nik, I would love to kind of turn it over to you. Would love to hear a little bit more about Sydecar, your story, where you guys are helping founders, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sounds great. Kind of picking up where you sort of left off on journey here. I'll start with just my background. I practiced law for about 10 years. Ended up working with VCs and companies directly at a firm called Cooley, where I practiced law for about 2.5 years. Then started my own firm. Ended up representing clients directly that I met while at Cooley, and kind of just started to get more exposure to the strategy behind the scenes of running an organization. Kind of fell in love with the founder journey myself. And that's kind of what led me ultimately to want to be a founder. But before I took that step to becoming a founder at Sydecar, I invested in a number of companies through 18 Ventures, which is how I met my co-founder, David. That was our endeavor together. And when we put together investments at 18 Ventures, we had we started a business by leveraging SPVs. And, maybe this gets us to what an SPV is, but basically when you're in a new venture capitalist trying to build a track record, the easiest way to do that is to start actually investing in deals, to actually build, a record of investments that you made, so you can then advertise what you're really good at, which is identifying amazing founders and putting capital to work. And an SPV is basically a streamlined venture capital fund. It's a fund that's created for just a single investment. It's often called, special purpose vehicle or a single purpose vehicle. That's what SPV stands for. So when we started our business as investors, we leveraged this SPV, this single company to invest in another company, where you collect capital from a variety of investors. And in doing so, we kind of discovered that the landscape of fund admins out there and other providers that cater to venture capitalists who are trying to build this track record, build a business of leveraging SPVs and investing in companies, was lacking a real product-driven approach. And that's kind of how Sydecar was born, was realizing that venture capital has historically lacked what companies have benefited from when it comes to standardization and how fundraise processes happen. For example, if you're a company raising money, many of the people in the audience today might be companies. You probably have heard of a term called the SAFE, which is a simple instrument for raising capital for your organization as you kind of kickstart the process, maybe go from your pre-seed to seed stage or what have you. But if you're a venture capital fund, there is no standardization. There's no single instrument. And Sydecar's vision from day one is to build that standardization and create a product suite that actually automates all of the processes of acting as a venture capitalist. And the mission we've been on since day one has been to kind of make the VC's business more attractive and attainable for the average venture capitalist. Along that journey, of course, we've realized that users of venture capital infrastructure, like these SPVs or funds in general, can be many, not just limited to early stage VCs like myself and David, since we both kind of moved into Sydecar, but it could also be other businesses. It could be founders themselves who are looking to consolidate capital into one line on their cap table, not deal with some of the admin hassles of chasing smaller checks from angels, so on and so forth. But hopefully that kind of gives you some more context on the story.
Yeah, awesome. Was the path like lawyer and then you wanted to be an investor from there, or was it always like, man, I always wanted to be a founder before first and foremost?
I think secretly I've always wanted to be a founder.
Yeah.
The story goes as far back as like childhood. I started my first job legitimately was when I was like 10 or 11 years old, legit child labor, working for my family business, where I would just answer the phone and talk to customers all day long and then package stuff to ship out to our customers. It was a very different industry. It was a jewelry business. But since then, I've always wanted to be a founder. And I think investing was like a way to get me closer to what I really wanted to do. And then flipping over to the founder hat was just like, honestly, it's been the most thrilling journey so far.
Awesome. So getting into SPVs, we talked about that, but maybe just kind of quickly talk to this slide and we'll get to some maybe more poignant questions. But for those maybe first time experience in this, or I'm a first time founder, I've raised a little bit of capital. What are some of the benefits that I can get from having SPV on my cap table?
There are a variety of benefits that you get as a founder. I think the most practical benefit, if there is an SPV being associated with your fundraise, is that you're likely working with, on the other side, and this is an SPV that you're not leading as a founder yourself. But if there are SPVs around you, it's likely because you're working with investors who are in the earlier stage of becoming a venture capitalist, or maybe they're casual VCs and actually really care about the mission. They really care about you as a founder, and they probably spend some more time getting to know you and are probably most helpful to you relative to other investors on your journey. And it's a way for those investors to get some upside beyond just the money that they can afford to invest in your company, because they believe in you so much they want to bring other investors along for the journey. I mean, that's the first and probably most notable benefit. I think another benefit is that rather than having a bunch of investors hit your cap table and all have to go through the process of either working with your counsel or you and signing documentation, you tracking their wires, you taking care of compliance filings related to their investment, you have a single point of contact for all of those investors. And you come into one vehicle that is somewhat of a commoditized structure where investors don't really care too much about the terms of that structure. They really just care about the company. This is a way to aggregate that capital and coalesce it before it hits your cap table. I think the last benefit is just, looking downstream, it's easier to administer those relationships because you now have a single point of contact, the deal lead, whoever led that investment, to communicate with all the other people behind the scenes. So if that means, leveraging Visible, for example, to send an investor update, you're sending it to one person who's then distributing perhaps information to others who can be most helpful within that SPV. Those are the main benefits that come to mind.
Yeah, awesome. What does it take? I'm going to hit on actually like a founder led SPV here for a second. Can we dig into that? Because I think, a lot of our audience are founders, and I saw some of our customers even in here. Why, as a founder, would I set up an SPV to invest essentially in my own company? Like, walk me through the mechanics of why I should do that and maybe how it would work.
Yeah. So why would you do it? First and foremost, the convenience aspect that I touched on just now. Having everyone come in through a entity setup that allows you to collect information about them and have them fund without you having to really chase them for signatures, and chase them to actually kind of get everything in order to make the investment in your company. The second is you don't have to really adjust what you may have set for your cap table as far as a minimum threshold to participate downward to accept that $1,500 check from someone that can't afford to invest more in your company, but maybe is a really active, enthusiastic supporter of your business. You can put them in an SPV. And I think another benefit that is not really frequently touched on, but is really practical here, is that you, if you're a founder structuring the SPV, are likely holding the voting rights for all of the shares that are in that SPV. Your SPV investors, being minority stakeholders, are basically giving you their proxy saying, you know what, why don't you vote for my shares? So you basically gain additional voting leverage on your cap table, should that ever be relevant to your journey, which I think is something that is actually a huge benefit. Actually, I'll mention one other one, Mike, that I don't, again, it's not really talked about here. When as a founder myself, with a variety of investors on our cap table, I'm not really thinking today about whether they're going to have the opportunity to access liquidity prior to Sydecar's exit, right? Because I'm just focused on only one goal, which is making sure Sydecar becomes a really valuable, important member of sort of the startup community and the venture capital landscape. Ultimately, of course, there will hopefully be a liquidity event that's net positive for everybody, which may be the case for, of course, everyone in this call. But I'm not trying to structure liquidity opportunities for people, right, who are on the cap table today. And it probably wouldn't be cool if someone came to me and said, you know what, I want to transfer my shares and I'm transferring it for some valuation that I'm setting for your company, because that would actually affect what I'm able to do as far as employee incentives. It affects what's called the 409A valuation, which I rely on for actually issuing options to employees at Sydecar. But it could also set a valuation or a tone for my next fundraise. So I wouldn't be so keen on supporting that. But if you have an SPV on the cap table, you're basically allowing people to potentially access liquidity through that SPV, either among members of the SPV or with third parties, without really affecting your underlying valuation. That's something we're building to at Sydecar, kind of enabling liquidity through these structures, which is a part of our vision, which I think is a benefit that's not really realized today, but something we hope that you'll be able to realize if you leverage one of our SPVs.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, that's yeah, that's huge. There's a couple of things I want to go back to there. One is talking from personal experience. When I first started Visible, I collected a bunch of angel checks, and first time founder, first time fundraising, you're just like, yep, get him in the door. And then every time you go to raise in the future, you need to get some sort of transaction done. You're just chasing signatures from people, and it's such a pain in the butt, because a lot of times the angels are great, but they got a million things going on, and just tracking all of that down is such a hassle. So I think that's a huge benefit in itself, and just in terms of sanity and peace of mind, which I think is great. Now, talking about the balance there, right? Because you mentioned, hey, you're going to give founders, basically, I get to vote for your shares. How do you avoid a conflict of interest where, hey, I control this SPV, but maybe I'm going to do, I don't know, a down round, and you're going to get affected as an SPV, or how do I broach that conversation with those investors? Hey, I have your best interest in mind, so that there's no conflict of interest. Maybe you would accept terms that would be suboptimal.
Yeah, it's a good question. Ultimately, all relationships are fundamentally based upon trust and feeling like you are aligned, right, with the person you're entering a transaction with, whether it's investing directly on a cap table or investing through an SPV. Of course, if you're direct on a cap table and you have voting rights, you technically have a say every time something comes to a vote. If you're through an SPV and the founder has the proxy to your voting rights, then you've essentially you've given those rights away to somebody else, and you're trusting they kind of wield that power appropriately. My personal philosophy is always disclose, right? Share as much as you can and why it makes sense for someone to trust in the transaction you're setting up, and fully disclose why you're voting a certain way if you have that right. And if people have a problem with it, they might bring it to your attention, but it's rare that there would be such a grave conflict from a stockholder vote standpoint that you as a minority stakeholder would have an issue with. Because
Mhm.
usually what would happen in these major transactions is you have the board also, right, approving a transaction where even if you have the founder and CEO on the board approving it before the stockholders get to vote on it, no one can really think in that self-interested manner. There are these duties of loyalty and care that come into play. And maybe I'm putting the lawyer hat back on and kind of talking about lawyerly terms here, but those
Sure.
duties are things that we all have to take very seriously as founders, right? Because we're raising capital, people are literally putting their hard-earned savings behind our mission. I mean, that's an honor, right? That we have to represent and take care of.
Yeah, absolutely. What about, let's maybe going to some of these questions here, not just necessarily founder led, but just getting to some of the mechanics. Like, and we'll use Sydecar as a reference. What was it like before having to get an SPV set up, and what is it like now to use a tool like Sydecar?
Yeah, so if we think of before as before there were any product-driven organizations focused on creating these types of investment vehicles, it would have been calling a lawyer, receiving an agreement from your lawyer that sets up the SPV, working with your lawyer to set up an entity in Delaware, going to a bank, contacting your banker, opening bank accounts, making compliance filings, of course, manually, tracking capital manually, right? And then you having to sign the actual agreement with a third party you're investing on behalf of the SPV manually, maintain records manually. The whole thing would have been manual. Of course, then on the other side, you have to engage a tax provider and an accountant to help you understand the accounting and tax responsibilities of the SPV and make the tax filings with the IRS and any other state authority, and then distributing tax returns and K-1s to your investors annually. So there's all these different processes that would have been really manual. With an SPV provider like Sydecar, and there's some others out there now, that's really streamlined, right? And what's special about what we're doing at Sydecar is that we've actually automated and built product around all of those things I just described, so that in practically real time, you can get an SPV up and running with live banking, with KYC that happens in an automated fashion for all of your investors, where wires that come in are automated and tracked so that the minute someone wires or ACHs money in via like Plaid, where they can fund within our product itself, you get notified, the investor gets notified in real time. Everything happens when it should, rather than you having to manually check in all these processes. And then ledgers are built for these SPVs to make all those other compliance filings and tax filings in automated fashion also.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot easier, a lot more seamless, probably a lot less expensive as well. I want to go actually to the last question here on the side, which is like, who makes money on this? Like, what, in a venture fund, you hear 20% carry, 2% management fee. If I'm spinning up a traditional venture fund where I'm investing in many companies, what are typical terms you might see for someone setting up an SPV? Who makes money on the deal? And then kind of a follow-up from that would be, do those terms change if I'm a founder leading an SPV to make make it easier for collecting angel checks?
Yeah, that's another great question. So typically with an SPV, typically with a fund, like where you raise capital and deploy it over many investments, you charge a management fee and carried interest. So management fee is like your compensation for actively managing and deploying capital on behalf of the fund, right? You're putting in work and you're getting paid for that over time. And then you have carried interest. Carried interest is basically a share of the upside. Like if investors invest $100 in in a fund or an SPV that has a carried interest variable to it, and then the investment sells for, let's say, $1,000, money goes back to all the investors first, $100 returned to investors, then you have $900 of profit. So carried interest comes into play on that profit, where like when you talk about 10%, 20%, 30% carry, that percentage applies to that remainder, the $900, that then gets distributed to the investors as well as to you as the sponsor who's put in the work to find these amazing investments. So typically with an SPV as opposed to a fund, you don't see as much of the management fee component because SPVs are much shorter in timeline and effort for the actual deal lead, the sponsors putting it together. But you do see the carry component because that is the whole incentive for that deal lead to bring the deal to the investors and execute on it. Now, if you're a founder, it would actually be a conflict for you. This is where conflicts come into play. If you were to receive like fees for setting up an SPV to invest in your own company, or carry, which is basically extra upside on your own organization, right?
Yeah.
So you typically don't see fees and carry on a founder-led SPV.
Yeah. Awesome. What is we hear the term series LLC, getting back to some of the mechanics here. What is it? What are the benefits of using that as a structure?
So when we talk about structures, for every investor out there, when it comes to these investment vehicles, whether it's a fund or an SPV, the reason for choosing one structure over another often comes down to tax advantages. And LLCs, which stands for limited liability company, are in the U.S. this tax transparent vehicle, or you can elect it to make it tax transparent, so that you don't have to worry about paying taxes at the LLC level and also at your personal level when you receive money or you have expenses at the SPV level. And a series LLC, when you add the word series to it, you're basically expanding on this concept of a limited liability company and leveraging what certain states that actually allow you to create these entities have now permitted, which is a series structure, a series version of an LLC where you have one registered vehicle, and you can then create series of companies under that single registered vehicle. So you have a single registered limited liability company, that's an LLC, that's registered with, for example, Delaware, which is the most common jurisdiction. And then you have series that are created under that Delaware LLC. And you can think of it as like a parent and child relationship. And you can almost think of it as like a parent and child relationship when the child is like leaving for college, because the child is like very little tie into the parent. There's no sort of shared books, records. There doesn't have to be even shared management or control. The series just leverages the fact that you can create the series without having to go back to Delaware. You can create it by just signing a series agreement rather than having to wait for Delaware to actually register an independent LLC every single time. So it's kind of a nice, unique structure because you get all the benefits of an independent LLC under this umbrella structure without having to actually wait and pay fees for a separate LLC each time you want to invest in something.
Got it. Awesome. And then what about minimum investments? Like what do you guys see within your own community and customer group? Like what are minimums that founders might have in a founder-led SPV, or even just the emerging manager setting up a track record? What do you typically see for minimum investments into an SPV?
It's typically higher for like a third-party manager, and it's because the incentives are different. Usually if you're a manager that's running a business of investing in companies, it's the case that you don't want to spend too much time chasing checks, because you're working with the founder on the other side just saying, I gotta close this financing as soon as possible. Yeah. And SPVs have this reputation of being some of like the laggards in venture capital, because there's this collective action problem getting all of the SPV members to invest in the SPV and then move it into your company. So usually SPV managers, the actual sponsors, like to work with just fewer checks and larger checks. But if you're a founder, the incentives are often different, and the incentive is often, let me try to get everybody who is passionate about what I'm building and wants to help more aligned with my mission, in addition to raising capital. So you see typically lower thresholds. Anecdotally, the smallest check size we've seen through a sidecar SPV is $100 into an SPV. Now, before this was all something you could do programmatically, that would not have made economic sense. I still scratch my head at whether $100 is really going to change someone's life, even in the most amazing outcome for the company. But it was a great way for that founder to say, everybody can come as long as they're accredited.
Yeah, awesome. We talked about the kind of benefits here. I want to see if there's, I think we touched on most of these actually, because I kind of cut to this. I was mostly curious about the founder to founder, but maybe the last one here. Last question is around like potential for investor secondaries that do not affect your ability to fundraise. Like, let's talk. Can you kind of just repeat that again? I know you already talked about it, Nick, but I think it's super interesting and super important for kind of all of the founders here to really understand that.
Yeah, I'll touch on it again, and maybe we can even just talk about it, like Visible as an organization. Like, let's say I was an investor in Visible, and I invested a good amount of cash in your prior round, and I now had someone that was willing to purchase some of my Visible stock from me. Right? Mm-hmm. How would I structure that today if I wasn't invested through an SPV? Well, first I'd have to talk to you, Mike, and be like, hey, Mike, like, can you please consent to this transfer? And your questions would be, well, how does this affect Visible? How much are you selling it for? Right? Will this affect my ability at all to raise again? Will it affect my ability to offer incentives to my employees? Like, how does it change the value or perceived value of my company? And you'll have to then go to your board and get a waiver from the board of the company's right of first refusal, which is in your bylaws most likely, since you're a venture-backed company. You'll also have to go to every other investor, or I will, and say, you know what, I found someone to buy my shares, Just do any of you want to buy these shares first? And it creates this whole process minefield, right? And the alternative, let's say I invested through an SPV and I'm a smaller check, and maybe liquidity matters even more to me than your lead investor or someone invests substantial cash knowing it would be a long holding period, is that now I'm in the SPV, not on the company directly, cap table directly, and I hold a sliver of this SPV. If I find someone to buy my SPV interests, I don't really even have to talk to you. I can just say, you know what, you want to buy my SPV interests? Cool, I'll sell it to you for 50% more than what I paid for it, right? And maybe I notify you because that's the right thing to do, right? And I ask you for information I can share with this third party and make sure you're okay with that person coming into the SPV. But that's it. It doesn't affect your follow-on valuation. It doesn't affect your ability to incentivize employees. You don't need a board waiver, typically. You don't need investor ROFR waiver either, typically. There's a much simpler way to give some of your smallest investors an opportunity to create liquidity in a way that they just don't have if they went the traditional route.
Yeah, that's awesome. We'll make sure to put that in our write-up, so everyone can kind of see that in the write-up as well, because I think that's a huge benefit. Just getting into some other considerations for founder-led. We mentioned accredited, so this is still the case where your SPV backers have to be accredited. Is that correct?
That's right. So if for founders raising capital, all the investors coming onto the cap table typically have to be accredited, because there's this safe harbor exemption from you registering as a public company whenever you raise money by issuing a SAFE or preferred stock or whatever. It basically says all your investors have to be accredited. And that same obligation applies even to an investor that is a degree removed from your cap table. Because let's say I'm an SPV investing on the cap table, the SPV has to be accredited, right? Along with all the other investors directly on the cap table. And for the SPV to be accredited, it basically has to confirm that all of its members are accredited, so that accredited status requirement passes through to the SPV as well.
Yep. Let's see. 506C. That sounds lawyery. What does that mean?
So 506C. Yeah, I mentioned this exemption from registration that the company founders rely on when they're raising capital. That I'm gonna put the lawyer hat on again briefly. Hopefully I don't lose people. But that exemption is under this regulation, under U.S. Securities Law called Regulation D. It's a safe harbor where if you follow certain rules, you don't need to register and you don't need to worry about the SEC coming at you and auditing your processes. So the rules that apply for that exemption are under Rule 506 typically, and then there's a distinction between 506B and 506C. So most fundraising transactions happen under what's called Rule 506B, which is where you work only with accredited investors and you have a pre-existing and a substantial relationship with those investors. And when those investors come to invest in your company, you usually just have them fill out a questionnaire indicating how they're accredited, and you're good. You don't need to then go and ask them for their tax filings, their pay stubs, bank account statements, et cetera, to confirm that they're actually accredited by asking for sensitive financial records or a letter from their lawyer or accountant. However, if you don't have that relationship with these investors, that substantial pre-existing relationship, and instead you want to just run a fundraise process and still be in the safe harbor, but run a process where you're just kind of advertising it broadly, like you're tweeting, hey, I'm raising money for my company, anybody in? If you do that and people come in, you don't know, now you can't be in 506B territory in what's called 506C, which is where you're allowed to generally solicit, you're allowed to post something on Twitter and broadcast it. But now you can't just rely on an investor checking a box saying how they're accredited. You have to actually verify they're accredited by asking for a letter from their accountant or lawyer, seeing their bank statements and tax returns, et cetera, which is, of course, something people aren't so keen to hand over.
Yeah. What about blue sky fees? What should I know about these and make sure it's on my radar?
So if we execute our business well, you should never have to think about blue sky fees, right? Blue sky fees are fees you have to pay every state where an investor resides that's participating in your financing round. So that may still apply if you have direct investors in your cap table. Typically, lawyers help you with that. For an SPV, that is a cost that, of course, Sydecar incurs in running our business based upon wherever investors in the SPV reside, and we have to basically file a form with every state and pay a small filing fee for all of that participation.
Yeah, awesome. Finally, here, how should I set expectations with people that maybe back my SPV, and how should I communicate with the different backers and LPs of my SPV?
I think that you should disclose any sort of limitations on voting up front. If you are getting the proxy to vote their shares, you should disclose that, even though they could technically read the agreement and maybe it's a slightly longer agreement. They're not going to notice this, but I would disclose that. And best practice is to still include them on all investor updates and make sure that they're receiving these updates directly, because you never know how someone can help. I'm sure you've seen this, Mike, but sometimes you get help from the most unexpected places and investors.
Yeah, and especially if you're like an emerging manager using SPVs, like sharing an update once a month or a quarter, that's a marketing vehicle for all your future deals as well, right? You are effectively nurturing and providing some update to like the ideal customer for the next SPV you do. So I totally agree that being upfront and transparent about what the structure is, and then just using it. And then to your point, Nick, like there's a ton of ways that the members of that SPV can likely help you, because it's probably the reason why they chose to back it in the first place, right? They want to be part of something and help. Sure. Cool. I think we got some questions coming in. Let me pull up some questions. Can we talk about Europe for a second? I saw that come in. Hold on, let me pull up the question doc here. Do SPVs work with Europe? We're Berlin based, and we're not sure if it will work for us.
Yes. So we have at Sydecar supported investments in companies all over the world that have investors participating from all over the world. The company does not have to be based in the US. And in fact, Delaware and these LLCs we create, which are tax transparent, is a pretty efficient jurisdiction to structure these transactions because of how simple it is to set them up, how low cost it can be with a provider like Sydecar, and the fact that you can invest anywhere. Now, banking can sometimes be an issue. Being completely transparent on where there can be pitfalls here, banking can be one of them, especially since relying on transfers oftentimes to the US and back to a foreign company, to another country, can be problematic with wire transfer fees. They can definitely add up, especially if the currency that you're receiving your funds in has to be something other than dollars, given that banking in the US, of course, requires dollars. That is something we're working on solving in Sydecar. But if you're working on a transaction outside of a product like Sydecar, that can be really problematic. Yeah. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward, just like a normal SPV investing in a US company with US investors.
Cool. Here's one from Amy. I'll take a stab at this one and let you see if I miss anything, Nick. But she writes in, how do you find SPVs as a founder? Seems like a great option. First of all, I would, hopefully our team will send out Amy. We had a founder on, one of our customers, Jeremy, and he did his own, but with a lot of great resources. There's a lot of actual communities like on Discord and Slack, different folks that love to like back SPVs, and that can source as maybe a place for you to start. And then I would definitely check out Sydecar's website and check out connect.visible.vc. It's our investor database. We have a ton of different types of investors, so you might be able to find some there as well. Nick, any other resources come top of mind for that question from Amy?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I was going to suggest some of these Slack and Discord groups, some of the best places to go and pitch your raise and meet some amazing angels who might actually end up launching an SPV investor company.
Yeah, awesome. Nikos wrote in, do SPVs work both for unpriced and priced rounds?
Yes.
There we go.
They do.
What about Jobs 4.0? I saw there was a blog post there. What is the implications of Jobs 4.0, and what's your quick take on it?
Quick take is that it's got a long way to go before it becomes legislation. It's just a proposal in Congress. It's not even a bill. And that basically means it's kind of more of a discussion topic. But if it were to pass, it would ease a lot of the requirements that limit participation. The accreditor rules would be eased, and what it means to be a venture capitalist and what you can invest in would also be eased significantly. So we're proponents of it, definitely.
Yeah, awesome. costs. Talk to me about costs. Like what are typical costs I might see if I'm trying to set up maybe a founder-led SPV, maybe call it $500,000. I would want to get together.
Yeah, so $500,000 pricing can vary a bit, but a good benchmark would be to think that about $10,000 would go towards SPV setup fees. That would be a one-time fee that covers 10 years of administration, banking, tax filings, blue sky fees, everything that we talked about here that hopefully you never have to think about again. It's all wrapped into one fee.
Here we go. Another real-time queue. Can the single purpose SPV, sorry, it's backward. Can the SPV terms change as we go? Let's say it stays open for quite some time and the org moves forward with the model, gets traction with safes, and raising maybe the cap. How would that work?
So it's a good question. If you were to raise the cap, you would technically have some investors investing in one safe at a lower cap, presumably, and other investors investing in another safe at a higher cap, presumably. And now you have these two assets in a single SPV, which can be problematic if you're trying to leverage one of those benefits, which is the secondary transfer potential without affecting your cap table. It's best to have a single asset in a single SPV to preserve all of those benefits. So what we suggest to our customers is just create a second SPV and we discount the second SPV to make this easier for them.
Got it. Awesome. I think those are most of the questions that we had here. Nik, any, oh, sorry, we got one more coming in. When do you plan to offer 506C structures? Does Sydecar enable series LLC setup only for Delaware or other states as well?
Only Delaware for now. We're actually looking at jurisdictions outside the US next. 506C is something we plan to enable later this year. And until then, there are other sources that you can use to perform 506C checks that we can refer you to, but we're building that in-house later this year.
Awesome. If I want to learn more about Sydecar, is the website the best place to go?
Absolutely. Hit me up on Twitter as well, or by email, nik@sydecar.io. I'll put that in the chat as well for anyone that wants to reach out. And that's Sydecar with the Y, so nik@sydecar.io.
Awesome. Well, I hope everyone enjoyed this. We'll get the recording out. Nik, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their day, or a lot of people in Europe and Africa. So thanks for staying on late with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. See you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.